Is Western civilization a construct designed to support imperialism and racism? Thoughts on the book The West by Naoise Mac Sweeney. I just finished reading The West, A New History in 14 Lives by Naoise Mac Sweeney. This is the first of 2 articles commenting on her book. This first article focuses on the 2 main premises of her book. She starts off her book by explaining the purpose or premise of her book. These quotes from the first few pages give you an idea of her thinking. The origin myth of the West imagines Western history as unfurling unbroken back in time through Atlantic modernity and the European Enlightenment, back to the brightness of the Renaissance and the darkness of the Middle Ages, back, ultimately, to its origin in the classical worlds of Rome and Greece. But it is wrong. It is a version of Western history that is both factually incorrect and ideologically driven. A grand narrative that constructs Western history as a thread running singular and unbroken from Plato to NATO, and that is usually referred to by the shorthand term Western civilization. This idea of Western civilization as a linear cultural inheritance is drummed into us from an early age. The grand narrative of Western civilization is factually wrong. The modern West does not have a clear and simple origin in classical antiquity and did not develop through an unbroken and singular lineage from there, through medieval Christendom, the Renaissance, and Enlightenment to modernity. Western civilization, as a conceptual framework, has provided a justification for Western expansion, imperialism, and ongoing systems with white racial dominance. She makes 2 points. First, Western civilization is not some unbroken chain of events from antiquity to today. Second, Western civilization is just a concept designed to support imperialism and racism. Let's examine her arguments. In a discussion of Western civilization, we should start by defining Western civilization. What is it? Western civilization or Western culture is a culture that developed primarily in Western Europe over many centuries, which was based on Judeo-Christian values, and that culminated in concepts such as individualism, freedom, liberty, equality, and capitalism. The same concepts that are enshrined in the United States Constitution and that inform much of the societal values in the United States. Now, let us look at her arguments. She says that Western civilization is not some unbroken chain of events. She states, a grand narrative that constructs Western history as a thread running singular and unbroken from Plato to NATO. She footnotes the term Plato to NATO. The footnote reads as follows. From Plato to NATO was a phrase widely used to describe a number of broad cultural courses taught mostly in the USA that purported to survey Western civilization. It is also the title of a popular book on the history of the West written by David Gress in 1998. There may be college courses that use that phrase. I could only find 2. One course at Stanford describes the content of the course as the course explores the history, politics, and culture of the Eurasian space, covering themes such as the rise and fall of civilizations, political and ideological movements, literature and art, and geopolitics. I'm not sure how Mac Sweeney gets from that course description to Western history as unfurling unbroken back in time. The very phrase, the rise and fall of civilizations, would suggest something that was not unbroken. The second part of the footnote is for the book by Gress. The problem is the book may be titled From Plato to NATO, but the book's premise is just the opposite. A review of his book states, the author's central plea is that the idea of the West not be identified as a straight line from Greece to the modern West. Instead, it should be viewed as a synthesis of Greek and Roman thought, with political institutions and habits later borrowed in part from Germanic tribes. All is modified first by Christianity and then by the Enlightenment, and all messy and tracing far from a straight line. So, she implies in her book that the grand narrative is this unbroken chain of history from Plato to NATO, and even footnotes the term, but the very sources she cites purport the exact opposite. Anyone who knows anything about history knows the evolution of Western civilization was anything but a very bumpy road of fits and starts. And in looking back, the very fact that the concept of Western civilization survived and thrived is a miracle. The Greek and Roman empires disappeared. Wars raged across Europe for 1,000 or more years. communism seriously challenged Western thinking. Defeating Nazism was never certain. The Ottoman Empire came close to taking over Europe, and internal strife between Christian religions tore countries apart. The battlefields and towns of Europe are littered with 100 million bodies from two catastrophic world wars. At the same time, imperialism, conquest, racism, slavery, and a host of other unsavory human behaviors ran rampant across the globe. The development of Western civilization is not and never was an unbroken chain of history, and even today is at risk from those who do not believe in individualism, freedom, liberty, equality, and capitalism. Her second premise is that Western civilization was somehow a justification for expansion, imperialism, and racism. Did expansion, imperialism, and racism occur by the countries, and in the countries whom we think are most responsible for the development of Western civilization? Of course they did. Britain, Germany, France, Spain, the Netherlands, Italy, and the United States all engage in imperialist expansion and racism. But was Western civilization the impetus, or was Western civilization a counteracting force? We know from history that many tribes, families, sects, ethnic groups, kingdoms, and countries engaged in various forms of imperialism and racism. On the imperialistic side, we can name the Turkic Khaganate, the Han Dynasty, the Sasanian Empire, the Ming Dynasty, the Japanese Empire, the Rashid Caliphate, the Qing Dynasty, the Umayyad Caliphate, the Russian Empire, and the modern-day Chinese Empire. None of these instances of imperialism were inspired or justified by Western civilization. On the racist side, Bhutan deported between 10,000 and 100,000 ethnic Nepalis. The Turks killed an estimate 1.5 million Armenians in their campaign of genocide. Some 500,000 Tutsi were slaughtered by rival Hutus in Rwanda. In Myanmar, 900,000 Rohingya Muslim refugees have fled to Bangladesh. Some 300,000 ethnic Chinese were exterminated in Cambodia by the Communist Party of Kampuchea. The Uyghur genocide is the ongoing series of human rights abuses perpetrated by the Chinese government against the Uyghur people. 43.5% of Indians responded to a survey that they would prefer not to have neighbors of a different race, and Sikhs and Muslims in India have experienced significant racism. In Japan, a person of Korean ancestry has great difficulty in getting citizenship. In Malaysia, Malays are given preferential treatment by the government over ethnic Chinese. And anti-Semitism is very common amongst modern-day Turks. None of these instances of racism were inspired or justified by Western civilization. It seems both imperialism and racism were alive and well, and still are alive and well in certain parts of the world, with no support of Western civilization. Why is it then the West racism and imperialism is the result of Western civilization, but in Asia and Africa racism and imperialism are not the result of Asian civilization or African civilization? Or is it that racism and imperialism are part of the human psyche and that both will and do occur in any civilization, including Asian civilizations and African civilizations? The reason is because racism and imperialism have nothing to do with Western civilization. Racism and imperialism are part of the human condition. People since the dawn of time have wanted to conquer the lands of others, and have believed they were superior to other people who spoke different languages, engaged in different practices, and who looked different. Western civilization, with its tenets of individualism, freedom, liberty, equality, and capitalism, was and is a driving force against both imperialism and racism. While Great Britain's flag was flying across the world, the thinkers of the time were coming out against imperialism. Adam Smith, Joseph Tucker, John Locke, John Cartwright, Richard Price, William Godwin, Arthur Young, and other political and philosophical thinkers in Britain were all against imperialism. Even Disraeli, considered to be a champion of imperialism, wrote in a private letter the following: "These wretched colonies will all be independent too in a few years and are a millstone round our necks." At the same time, thinkers of the day were also coming out against racism and slavery. The list includes Moses Brown, Benjamin Rush, Anthony Benezet, Susan B. Anthony, Abraham Lincoln, William Wilberforce, Thomas Clarkson, Alexander Hamilton, John Jay, Benjamin Franklin, and many others, to name a few. Many of the founding fathers grew up on estates that owned slaves but gave those slaves freedom during their lifetimes. George Washington not only freed his slaves upon his death, but also envisioned a world in which former slaves and former slaveholders lived together in harmony. In the evolution of Western civilization, the champions of Western thinking convinced those in power to dismantle imperialism and racism because it was the right thing to do. Was it easy? No. Did everyone agree? Of course not. Did it happen overnight? Not a chance. Did it entail bloodshed on the battlefield? The U.S. Civil War is a testament to that. The point is that Western civilization, with its tenets of individualism, freedom, liberty, equality, and capitalism, did evolve, and part of that evolution was that Western civilization was used as a force to stop imperialism, racism, and slavery, not as a tool to promote it. You must ask the question, why would Mac Sweeney focus her book on two premises that at the very least are questionable and based on evidence not necessarily true? Simple. The premises of her book are red herrings. It does not matter whether Western civilization developed in an unbroken line from Plato to NATO or a bumpy road of fits and starts. It does not matter if during the development of Western civilization, some people used it for imperialism and racism, and some people used it to fight both imperialism and racism. It does not matter if its roots lie with the Greeks, the Romans, Aborigines from Australia, or any other peoples who lived in antiquity. What matters is what is Western civilization today. You might find people in Cuba, Russia, Honduras, Guatemala, Palestine, Syria, Yemen, Niger, South Sudan, Angola, or Zimbabwe who are happy as canaries. But people from those same countries by the millions, risking personal safety and security, attempt to immigrate, legally or illegally, to countries where Western civilization flourishes. Western civilization is not perfect, and it is still evolving, but it is surely the best method of organizing society and helping all people that has ever been devised by humankind. My question is why Naoise Mac Sweeney has not, with her highbrow education from Cambridge and Harvard, managed to figure that out.